For more on that conversation, we're now joined by Lulu, the CEO of the Election Management Consultancy Agency of Africa. Lulu, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Recognition of extra-territorial voting rights. Is that a right that is guaranteed?
In terms of the Constitution, obviously, the right to vote is a guaranteed right. However, with every right, there are also limitations. And in this particular instance, we've seen that because of the violence and civil unrest in these three countries, unfortunately, that right has to be limited. There's no way that the IEC or DECO would be in a position to provide security for all the political unrest or threats to diplomatic staff or armed conflicts or war in Ukraine, in Israel, and in China. So where that is the issue, then that right, the right to vote, is actually suspended.
Yeah. So are we limited in terms of the modalities available to us to be able to carry out that right?
Unfortunately, as Simon Mabula, the CEO of the IEC, spoken earlier today, they only have made a provision for voter registration to be able to take place online. But the IEC, I think the argument that was being made in the afternoon is that the IEC, the law in the country that regulates the elections, would need to be changed before the IEC would consider an online voting facility. Obviously, in this particular instance, the best option that South Africa could have gone into would be an online voting facility where people that are outside the country, because then physically they don't necessarily need to be at a voting station or at an embassy. They would then have this facility available to them so that they're able to vote online. But because of the laws that the country currently has, that modality is not available at the moment for anybody.
So why call on them to go register online if there is no way in which we can make resources available to them in those particular zones because of the conflict?
Look, I think the reality that the IEC is currently facing is a balance of probabilities. Right? The IEC and possibly even DERCO could possibly be under the notion that perhaps by the time elections are declared and the election date comes forth, the civil unrest and the wars that are in these countries would have abated. And if that is the case, then people would then be able to actually go physically to the embassies to cast their votes. It's just, in my view, it's just a security measure, just a measure to ensure that people are able to participate should the situation that currently threatens those three countries abide.
So I suppose, could we then say that the violence would undermine the IEC's process or even the IEC's outcomes, considering that we're talking, 18,000 votes or so?
Yeah. In those three countries, definitely. Look, even in South Africa, when the civil unrest in South Africa, in whichever affected municipality and voting stations, elections in those places are actually never held. A new date is going to be issued for those particular specific places. So it stands to reason then, therefore, that even with those that are overseas, if there's civil unrest and there's violence in those particular embassies, it's not possible that the IEC could physically present people that would be there to facilitate elections. South African election process, the South African electoral process requires physical staff to be available at the embassies to be able to facilitate an election that is free and fair and credible. Having people go and vote in those current situations would actually compromise the integrity of the actual election overseas.
Yeah. How seriously do political parties themselves take the extraterritorial voting rights in terms of the political action that supports, I suppose, those experts who are out there that need to be mobilized?
I would argue that perhaps they're not as serious as they should because, in my view, the country, South Africa, is very advanced. Generally in the continent, South Africa is very advanced. The IEC has already taken the initiative to have voter registration online. Companies such as myself, such as EMTA, for example, we already use an electronic voting system for all our election processes. Therefore, it means that the facility and the infrastructure for the IEC to have an electronic voting system, a functional electronic system, is already existent within the country. And I believe that if political parties were really serious about ensuring that boundaries are removed as far as elections are concerned, this would have been something that would have been tabled in Parliament. They would have fought for it in Parliament, and legislation would have been amended in time or on time, so that people that are overseas are able to exercise their right in the comfort of whichever country that they're in.
Yeah. If we look now, maybe broadly, not just in South Africa, but maybe in the region as a whole, this concept of enfranchisement, how seriously is it being taken by the other players in the region?
I feel that institutions such as the IEC are governed obviously by Chapter 9 institutions. In South Africa, are governed by Chapter 9 institutions, and in the continent generally, they've got bodies that actually govern them. And those institutions are subject to certain laws and regulations. The legal framework within those institutions can be very limiting. But and I like to play devil's advocate and say, what are the citizens doing? Because you can't have a citizen that is moving forward. In terms of the research that's been done, 85% of young people within the next 5 years will have gadgets, whether it's a phone or a laptop, where they're able to actually cast their votes electronically. But none of these countries in the continent, particularly also in the region, are actually taking a move towards making sure that an electronic voting system is being introduced. And that actually says a lot. Some of these things, the IEC, electoral management bodies, are not the ones that are going to drive those discussions. It must be civil society and political parties that are affected by such that need to drive those discussions.
That was Election Management Consulting Agency of Africa CEO Lulu. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on.